Good morning, everyone. This is Pat Bailey, Director of Training at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. I'd like to welcome you to Building Bridges Toward LGBT Cultural Competency, Part 1. This is a three-part series. Today's call is complimentary and gives you a chance to have a sampler so you can see what the call is about. If you'd like to take the rest of the class, if you go up to our website, outandequal.org and Out and Equal University online training, follow the links for the live webinar training, and we'll do Part 2 and Part 3 in the next couple of weeks. This is a broadcast audio call, so you should be hearing us through your computer. Use your speakers or your headsets on your computer and turn the volume up. You can chat in questions, which is on the bottom left-hand side. Just chat in, and I'll be able to see those questions and respond to them as we go through the call. And we will have several polls today, so when a poll comes up on the screen, select your answer and hit submit. If you have any problems signing in or you drop off, this is how to get back in at ReadyTalk.com, join a meeting. And if you can't hear the audio, let me know in the chat box, and I'll be able to resolve that for you. We will be recording this session. If you are registered for the course, you'll get a copy of this back, and we'll get started. So again, welcome everybody. This is Building Bridges Toward LGBT Cultural Competency. We'll be doing a three-part course on the webinar. This is also a prerequisite for the Train the Trainer. So if you're interested in becoming a peer educator in your workplace and community and want to become certified for 2 years as a trainer, this course is a prerequisite for that. Again, you can listen to the recorded version if for some reason you drop off or have to leave before that. Today's course is going to look at a brief Out and Equal history and overview and who we are as an organization. And then we're going to talk about cultural competency. This is our first webinar, the basis of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender concepts and terminology. This will be a refresher for many of you, but it's also an opportunity to check your knowledge in a lot of different areas. We'll then go on in the next 2 sessions, and next week we'll be doing the business case, which looks at the impact of equality in the workplace. And then the third webinar will look at allies and action planning. Those courses will be conducted in a meeting webinar format where we'll have the ability to have more discussions with a smaller audience. We've got about 65 folks on the call right now. So I want to learn a little bit about who you are and what you do. So let's get started with our first poll. What's your business sector? So select one and hit submit, and you'll get a great graphic that will come up on there. Are you part of a corporation? Do you work for government, nonprofit, academic, consulting, or others? Go ahead and chat those in if you have others. It looks like we've got about 2/3 of the participants have voted in. Pharmaceutical from Marisha. And it looks like we've got about 90% of the audience right now is from corporations. We've got a few government, federal employees or contractors, and then nonprofit as well. Great. I'll give just everybody another minute or so to finish that poll up. Excellent. All right, let's ask the second poll question here. What's your position in your company? And this one you can select all that apply. Are you an executive, management, staff, salaried position, hourly position, unemployed, or other? And again, if other comes up, go ahead and chat those in. So we've got kind of a mix on that. A few executives on there. Looks like close between management and staff. Any salary positions? Or we've got about 72 folks on the call right now, so numbers are going up, so go ahead and vote and get your numbers in there. Great. So looks like that about 49% are salaried positions. Slight edge on management, about 38%, staff about 33%, and executive about 4.8%. So that looks good as a mix in terms of experience and background. And here's our third one. And how do you identify in the workplace? Are you not LGBT? Are you LGBT and out at work? Are you LGBT and not out at work? You're not LGBT and you identify as an ally? It depends. Prefer not to answer. Other, please chat in, or not applicable. And Megan, thanks for being a vehement ally. And again, we're up about 275 on the call. And looks like about 69% are LGBT and out at work. We've got about 7.9% as an ally. And Jean Claire is an ally and out as an ally. Another option there. Great. So we've got a good mix of backgrounds and experiences and from people all over the country that are engaged and involved and looking at this. And this course, the Building Bridges course, is our basic foundation course that we use. And it's based on some principles and that we work with is your involvement, because we find that over the years the best experience we've gotten is from people who are in the workplace that can carry this message forward. And open communication, trust, and confidentiality. So please, if you hear stories here, check with the person who might be telling them and say, is it all right for me to share that? And make sure you're not outing anyone, that I saw so-and-so on the call or we were talking about it. Make sure you keep that information for the person to tell. Each individual should be able to identify as LGBT or as ally and be able to share that information. And that's basically what Out and Equal is built on, is that we're a nonprofit organization, and we're looking at LGBT workplace equality. And we work with many of your organizations around the world, and in looking at that leadership and professional development, education, and research. We've been around for about 18 years. It began through United Way, and we were basically, they were giving money away in San Francisco to the United Way here, organizations, and they said there was a lot of LGBT folks and they needed awareness. So that's where Building Bridges came from. After some studies in the late 80s and early 90s, they began the course, and Felice Berry, our founder and CEO, was hired by the United Way to do that course. There was other groups who were beginning to organize employee resource groups in the workplace, and were beginning to hold conferences and summits about workplace equality. Those groups eventually all came together under the banner of Out and Equal, and in 2004 we became a 501c3 nonprofit and are based here in San Francisco, but work definitely all over the United States, and we're finding more and more global work as we're beginning to work with companies that are multinationals and with NGOs and nonprofits in other countries. So that's kind of our history and our background, but the Building Bridges course has always been there, and this is the starting point that we begin with. So let's jump into some of this cultural competency and see what that's about. And this is kind of the new word. We used to call it, developing diversity, and we call it D&I. But cultural competency is feeling comfortable talking about a topic and being familiar with the language. And many times we find allies or people who are not quite allies yet, they're aware, might not know what questions to ask or what words to use or what's the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. So we spend this first course with a little bit of time of talking about that and about our diversity in the workplace, because each of us brings a unique set of experiences into the workplace. And so the dimensions of diversity are a great start with that. Usually when we meet someone in the workplace, we know about where they might work, we might know their management status, we know what departments, their location, if they're part of a union, job title. We get that kind of information about individuals. So I've got a question here for you as the audience to say, let's talk about that level. Do you work at a national or global headquarters for your company? And so you can select the answers there. Yes, you are at the national headquarters. Yes, you're at the global headquarters. Yes, but you only have one office. That's my case here is our national headquarters and global headquarters are here in San Francisco. No, prefer not to say, not applicable, or other, please chat in. And John, I see your comment about back on the allies question. We've got about 25% are allies on the call, so that is great to see. So looking at this, it looks like we've got a good mix, about 33% at the national headquarters, about 30% at the global headquarters, about 26.5 say no, so we've got some folks that work in the field, and we've got some background there. So we're up to about 87 folks on the call, and I've got about 3/4 everybody in. Give one last second here to get the votes in to see. But again, a good mix of what we have for experiences, because a lot of times we see that experience at the headquarters is different from then in the field and based on where your field is. Thomas says not at the headquarters, but one of our largest locations in the offices. So as we get together in the workplace, we start to move to the next level of our dimensions of diversity, and we start to talk about what our background is. For example, I'm retired military, went to college here in California. How our work experience and the way we work, how we, we like mail, we like phone calls, so we are different in the way that we approach our work life and our life experience. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you another question to say, give me, just chat in something that you want to share about yourself from your work style, your background. I know Mitchie said, I'm active duty military, getting ready to retire. Currently I'm just a business startup, no longer a corporate guy. So that's a change in that background. So just type in your answers and hit submit there, and the answers will pop up. Do you get to meetings early? Are you on time? What's your education background? Do you have higher degrees? Did you graduate college? Just go ahead and chat in that chat box and hit submit, and we'll get some of those answers in. And have a bachelor's degree in business, BA in communication, 4-year degree, non-standard student, engineering, social person, prefer interpersonal, a nurse, work for a Fortune 100 company, graduated college and recently changed HR positions, graduated from art school, multiple management assignments, working single mom, OCD, BA in criminal justice, learning and development background, graduated from law school, a bachelor's in human resources. So we've got lots and lots of experiences here. ERG leader for 25 plus years, 33 years at an insurance company, work for a global job, and federal employee in San Francisco, project management for IT. So again, these are the things as we start to talk about our diversity and who we are, come in and shape the way that we work and shape our opinions and our backgrounds. And we get to know each other on day-to-day or working in our teams with that. I've got a mentorship chair for Pride, collaborative employee, prefer to arrive early at meetings. So excellent. Thank you for all that sharing. So then we get into our third level of diversity, dimensions of diversity. And there are things that sometimes are visible, things like race and gender, that when somebody walks in, we can see that and understand that. But other things like mental ability, physical ability, our age. We may or may not be able to determine how old someone is. Ethnicity and what their background is. I may identify you as Asian, but where are you from? Which part of Asia and what's your background? Sexual orientation and gender identity are also included in this. And as we see in the workplace, as each of these groups came together, 75 years ago, pretty much everybody worked within 5 miles of their home, and they knew everybody, and you were within your same ethnic group. In New York, if you were Irish or Jewish, you worked with your community, you knew each other. But as we began to grow, and as the population grew and we spread out more, we find that we get a lot more diversity in the workplace. So I know for me, when I went to college, that was the first time I had met someone who was a person of color. The school I went to as in the 50s and the 60s was all white, and when I got to college, that was a learning curve for me. I had to begin to understand, about race and the issues and that different experience that individuals had. And that's part of the growth in the workplace that we see. So as we get new groups in, we begin to say, well, we're not sure about them. And when we're not sure, our brains basically kind of go into defensive mode, and we're real protective, and we're not sure, and we want to know more about them. And until we get to know them, we don't necessarily build a lot of trust. So we see quotes over the years about when new groups come in or when changes happen in the society. And what I'm going to have you do is read through these quotes and look at some of these quotes that come up and where they come from. Because we think, well, this might be related to LGBT, but in reality, this was about blacks back in 1865. And then we see another quote there that comes up that, again, you might hear in the kind of rhetoric that we hear today in society talking about LGBT. But in fact, it was about Jews in Nazi Germany, the comment was made. And then finally, our last quote talking about brainwashing of our children and, what that impact is, again, tones and implications and words that we hear today, was actually said in 1997 about teaching racial equality in the schools. So we see a set of comments about new people coming into the workplace and into the communities, and people sometimes react badly, and comments are made, and we have to learn who each other are. This is true for the LGBT community. unlike race and gender, there's more safety and invisibility. We find many LGBT individuals decide not to come out as a result of comments they hear, on the school grounds. They hear that's so gay, or it's a put down and it's been said and teachers don't intervene or counselors don't intervene. In the workplace, we'll hear a lot of rhetoric, or in our community, if you're in states where the Religious Freedom Act is being discussed, or if you're talking about marriage, there's a lot of negative comments. So for many LGBT individuals, they decide to stay in the closet, would be the term, and be invisible and not come out. Additionally, a lot of us as allies as well have close family members who are part of our communities and part of our lives, that when it's talked about LGBT in a negative way, we also then don't feel comfortable with that conversation and may not know what to do. And that's the ally piece of this. So that's where we are today. The LGBT community is coming into the workplace. We are going to talk about in the business case some of the issues that are facing those employees. But first we have to have a good understanding of who this LGBT community is. So let's talk some now and get into kind of the two main areas, which is sexual orientation and gender identity. These are the two that we'll hear a lot that LGBT is involved in. And I want to kind of start as a caveat at this point is that we all have a sexual orientation and we all have a gender identity. But it starts even earlier than that when we start making assumptions. Our brains like to think either or. So think about when a baby is born. We hear the terms, it's a boy, it's a girl, and that shapes the color of your room, what toys you get to play with, if you can answer questions in math class, and what kind of jobs you might have. Those kind of terms of being boy or girl seem to be very simple. It's an either or. And so what we see, though, is that biology and nature gives us more variety than that. There is a condition that can happen at birth that baby can't be determined. Is it a boy or a girl? And doctors in the past would make a decision and say, this is not going to grow up to be a normal-looking boy, so we'll do a quick surgery, and Mrs. Smith, here's your bouncing baby girl. Doctors now have those discussions with parents before they just do those surgeries. But that can happen at birth and later on. So we see here, this is a graph we'll use several times here. We see that you've got male down here on the corner and female up here. Again, it's a boy or it's a girl. That seems to be very common and what we expect. But in fact, we have those babies that are born at birth that may not look anatomically correct, that doctors can't determine what the sex of the baby is. Or later on in life, at puberty, for example, a woman might suddenly develop facial hair or muscles more bulking up like a male due to hormonal issues. And then later on in life, if they wanted to have a child or something, they might find there might be some chromosomal issues. So that diversity is definitely part of our culture. And so we want to make sure that we understand that. Now, again, this is on the dimensions of diversity. It's not something you're going to see about a person, but it is part of who they are. And so that may come up in a conversation. It may not. Again, it's an individual story to tell. But it starts to get us thinking about not just having either-or discussions about life. And I got a couple questions about slides that are going out, and so we'll make sure that we get those out to the folks who are registered for the courses and get a copy of those, so just an update on the questions there. So let's now start talking about sexual orientation. We've been actually talking about this in the workplace since about the mid-1990s. So I'm going to start with a question here. And do you have a sexual orientation? Select your answer and hit submit. And we're up to about 93 on the call now, so we'll give everybody a chance to do that and to answer the questions. And what we see, it looks like a good high level, 90% plus say yes, and 5.4, 5.3 say I think so. And what's interesting with this question is that since about the mid-1990s, if I ask someone about their sexual orientation, it's translated in many people's brains to say, are you gay? And so many times we forget that there are sexual orientations, that we all have one. And here's a list of the terms that we use. Heterosexual, attracted to the opposite sex. Gay or lesbian, homosexual is a term there, but usually gay and lesbian. For heterosexual, you also hear the term straight being used. That's another one of those terms that is not a put down from the LGBT community, but talks about someone who's heterosexual. The clinical terms of heterosexual and homosexual, most people don't feel comfortable with, so they use straight, gay, and lesbian. We have bisexual or omnisexual, which means more than one gender, and attracted to both. asexual, not attracted, and then you hear questioning and queer. We don't hear a lot of questioning and queer in the workplace. What we usually recommend is that when talking about LGBT issues in the workplace is to use LGBT. Many Gen Y individuals are coming back in and reclaiming the word queer, but it's usually at this point it hasn't gotten into common use within the workplace. So the best way when you're talking workplace issues is to use LGBT. So let's look at these on the graph. What we see here is we see a man who is attracted to a man, would be gay. A man attracted to a woman would be heterosexual or straight. When we look at women, here, if a woman is attracted to a man, she would be heterosexual. If a woman is attracted to a woman, lesbian would be the term. Now, these are not absolutes. These vary. You might talk to somebody and say, no, I don't identify as a lesbian even though I'm a woman. I prefer the term gay. But you've got the general construct. So you know if somebody says to you, their identification, if they say they're gay or lesbian, that they're talking about, being lesbian or gay and being homosexual. We also will see the term bisexual here, attracted to both or any gender is the best way to say that. That's the current definition because gender is expanding as well. We'll talk about with gender identity. And then finally you have a new group that's getting very active is the asexual group. And this means you're not attracted. If any of you watch Big Bang Theory and you watch Sheldon, Sheldon has a girl who is a friend and they have a contract about dating and going out, but it's not really a girlfriend situation. Sheldon actually has identified as the actor as asexual. That's the way he plays Sheldon. But I have to watch it every week because they're kind of skirting that edge and getting closer to, having a relationship that would be a traditional boyfriend-girlfriend. But there is a growing activism group that comes up. And again, as we talk about sexual orientation, a lot of this doesn't come up. Like you don't introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Pat, I'm a lesbian. That's usually not the way we introduce ourselves in the workplace. But we do see that we tell our stories and we start talking about the people in our life and who we're involved with. We meet people when we go out in the community that we know at the workplace and we're with somebody. We talk about our life changes, marriage, adopting children, those kind of things. All of those stories tell us about sexual orientation in the workplace. So for folks who are not necessarily engineers and, they get the charts, I also want to do some pictures and think about, what are the images that when we see somebody, what do they look like as lesbians? We might have a stereotype that comes up in our mind, and we'll talk about those in a little while. But we also then have a lot of images that if we were to look at individuals, we might not perceive them as what we think our stereotype is. And that's one of the best ways of moving from that awareness about a topic to becoming an ally or being able to talk about it, is to realize we may think one thing, but that may not be the truth for everybody that we meet. We have gay men here. And again, the other thing we see with these pictures is that and Dana says, yeah, Pat would be androgynous from Saturday Night Live. Definitely, and we'll talk about that in terms of expression when we get to that. But you can see a lot of times the stereotype for a gay man is white, San Francisco, good job. That's what they look like. And you see we go across cultures here. And as we look at global kind of pictures and images, we see that in all cultures and all countries, we do see LGBT individuals living in those countries. Bisexuals, again, if you were to look at individuals, would you see them as being bisexual? And again, we'll talk about this in gender expression a little bit. But I do want to say something about bisexuals, because one of the things that happens within the LGBT community and within the larger community, there's a lot of stereotypes about bisexuals that we have to remember and understand and realize they are stereotypes and start working to change that sense of understanding. A lot of people will say, well, it's just a transitional phase. They haven't made up their mind yet if they're gay or lesbian, that they're promiscuous. They just want to, kind of be in, all the dating pools to be able to meet people. It doesn't really exist, or they're never going to be happy with one person. And a lot of things we see now, women say they're bisexual because it's trendy. If you think about I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry, those kind of songs, that's kind of a fantasy of seeing two women together. And men say they're bisexual because they don't want to admit they're gay. So again, if you think about all these stereotypes, it kind of says that the bisexual in the LGBT acronym doesn't really exist and isn't really there. And a lot of times for employee resource groups, someone who's bisexual who may be with a partner of the same sex is many times welcome into the group and they have great events, and then all of a sudden they might break up or be dating someone who's of the opposite sex, and suddenly that ERG may not be as comfortable with them, going like, well, we're not sure, are you really straight, are you bisexual? So sometimes we don't have those conversations with individuals. And the same things with the straight mainline community. If you're with a opposite sex person, well, you're gay or lesbian, so you're not really welcome to our dinner parties and things like that. So we really have to think about doing some more work around bisexuality in the workplace. And then also we have asexuals. Again, a growing group, and we're seeing more and more activism on this and discussions about not being forced to have to be in that kind of relationship, just enjoying people and not necessarily being in a relationship. And, of course, heterosexuals. So that gives an idea on sexual orientation. So let's do a couple of quick quizzes here and take a look at this and say, select what's the correct definition for assigned or birth sex. So your options are attraction regardless of gender, attraction to the same gender, doctor determines at birth, lack of attraction, or attraction to the opposite gender. Again, looks like we're getting the answers in here real quick. Give you a chance to do that. So again, we're looking for what's the correct definition of assigned or birth sex, and be sure you hit the submit button so you can see your answers. And again, we're talking about, at this point, I've got about almost half everybody's voted in. Again, as we're talking about sexual orientation, that is who you're attracted to, whether it's regardless of gender, the same gender, no attraction, or attraction to the opposite gender. So the correct answer here is doctor determines at birth. It's based on the anatomy because that's all the doctor has to go with, and thanks, Dana, on that. So the correct answer would be C, or doctor determines at birth. And again, if you think about it, it's what kind of sets us up at birth for a lot of our changes and situations in life, because society teaches us that this is the way a boy grows up, this is the way a girl grows up. So that's thinking about that diversity is still part of who we are. And then let's do a second question now. And what's the correct definition for bisexual? So again, select your answer. The choices are attraction regardless of gender, attraction to the same gender, doctor determines at birth, attraction to the opposite gender, or no attraction. Just about hit 100 folks on the call, so it looks like the answers are coming in quickly. Great. And we talked a little more on this one about bisexuality. You see the answers are coming in, attraction regardless of gender. So good answers on that, 100% on that one. So that gives us a good idea about sexual orientation and assigned and birth sex as we move forward there. And remember, attraction to the same gender would be lesbian or gay. Attraction to opposite gender would be heterosexual or straight, and no attraction would be asexual. And we'll go back and we'll do a summary of those charts at the end with that. But let's talk a little bit now about gender identity. Gender identity has come into the workplace and discussions probably just since about 2008. There was an employment non-discrimination bill that was introduced in 2008 that included protections not only for sexual orientation but gender identity. And there was a big discussion in White House about taking gender identity out because not enough people understood it or what it meant or who that was. And so that became the discourse that began joining in the community about talking about gender identity. And again, remember that we all have a gender identity. So some of the terms that we see is a man, a woman, transgender, bigender, ambivalent, gender fluid. Ambivalent is really androgynous, and we'll talk about each of those. But let's take a look, and I've added some pictures in here as well. So let's say that you're born a man, and you look inside yourself, because gender identity is about the feeling of who you are inside. So you look inside yourself, and your image of yourself is that you are a man. The term that's used with that is cisgender. Matches your biological assigned birth sex and how you feel inside. Then also we have, then if I'm born a woman, but I feel like a man, so that's female to male, term could be used transgender. And again, these terms are changing a lot, but being able to understand that there are women who, when they look inside themselves, they feel like a man. And so that would be the term transgender. And we'll talk about that umbrella term a little bit more. We also then have for a woman who was born and assigned at birth as female, who feels like a woman inside, again, would be cisgender. And then if I am a man, but I feel like a woman inside, so male to female is what that acronym means, again, the term transgender could be applied. We then have individuals who feel like both, either bigender or gender fluid. We see this actually, it's not something new. It's basically in First Nation tribes. They used to have two-spirited individuals, and they still do. But in the original tribe configuration, they were the holy people. They would be the people that you would go to for ceremonies. Or if a man and a woman had a fight, they would go to the two-spirited person to be able to talk about, what are the differences, and can you translate how they are? I think today we call that therapy. But basically we have the opportunity to say we can be both. I'm not going to pick just one. Or I might go back and forth. And again, we're seeing a lot of this coming in through Gen X and Gen Y. You'll see a lot of discussions on campus about how I want to identify or don't want to identify. And that's our final group in this, is the agender, is I don't want to pick either one. And part of that, it says that we can have a whole set of stereotypes that come up around us if you say I'm a boy or a girl. And so I don't identify with either of those labels. Dana makes a point, it's interesting that in some cultures the term trans means neither male or female. So interesting as this translates around the world, because the global discussion of this is also interesting, where we're starting to see countries that are putting on the passport male, female, and other to identify those who are transgender. So we have a whole very complex system here about gender identity, and we may not have thought about it before unless you are transgender or agender or bigender. And these are some pictures of transgender individuals. We heard Janet Mock in the beginning. She was the opening speaker that at our plenary in 2013, and her discussion about what it means to be out as a trans woman and her activism around that has been a really interesting journey for her. So you can find that full clip if you missed any part of that up on our website. But let's talk about what the term transgender means. We have talked about it in a corporate culture where it means someone who's transitioning and physically changing their body, and we have a transition plan, and we've got the health insurance, we've done all those kind of workplace benefits. But it can be a term that simply says how I feel about myself is different from the sex that was assigned to me at birth based on the physiological anatomy. And so you don't have to do anything to be someone who identifies as transgender. But if you decide that you want to go through that process, and I was born a woman, but I feel like a man, and I want my body to match, and how to do that. Emily talks about Janet Mock's book of Redefining Realness is really good. That's a good resource. Thanks, Emily. But think about what you'd have to change. Your legal documents, all your birth certificate, your legal name. Passport. This is actually in the United States, the passport was one of the first unifying areas where you could go in and change your gender if you were under a doctor's care, and with fairly simple documentation you could change that. Because imagine now that I'm looking like a man, and I walk into a situation and my ID says I'm female, and how difficult that would be. Also your Social Security card and all of that information. And then what about your life issues? As you're older, if you got married, if you went to school. I have a friend of mine who transitioned later from female to male, and he went to an all-women's college when he was school. And so when he sends in his resume to the workplace, the first thing they see is this women's college and this guy, and they say, talking about, well, is this guy an idiot because he went to a women's college? I wonder what else is wrong with his resume. Or he has to come out in the first few lines of his resume as transgender. So he's learned how to do that as he's gotten older a little bit. It's a little clearer for him now how to do that. But just think about all the things. And Dana says checking references and all of those situations. So it's a big step to do that. And one of the things that happens with that is about changing pronouns. So I'm going to put a little video clip on here to talk about, this is from BuzzFeed, about using pronouns. So we'll start this clip here.
I go by she, her, and hers pronouns. That's just how it's been for me.
My pronoun is he, and I present as a he. Some trans people might look like me, and present as a she.
Recently, I've come across they, and I like they. So you can refer to me either as she or they.
I like to be referred to as many things. It's really about what sort of feels good to our ears when we hear it.
Pronouns are important because they indicate a degree of respect. Who doesn't want to be respected?
For a long time, a lot of people have felt like that they don't fit into the mold of primarily he or primarily she, or maybe they feel they're a blend of both and that there's not really a word for that.
I found out about gender nonspecific pronouns ze and here, and I thought that was funny. That makes people trip up, because really technically I'm not a she. I'm not a he either.
There are some situations where we really put way too much stock into whether or not somebody is a man or a woman. There's a lot of situations that we just don't need to necessarily have gendered language. If you're unsure about somebody's pronoun, pull them aside and ask, hey, what are your pronouns?
It's not even preferred pronoun because it is their pronoun.
So some people go by he, some people go by she, some people actually use the pronoun they.
You can avoid mistakes by just saying them, theirs, they.
Their gender is still valid regardless of whether or not you understand it.
Misgendering a person by using an incorrect pronoun is an act of disrespect.
Everybody else in the world out there can say, I am, and they identify themselves, and everybody believes them. But when I say I am, I don't know why people just don't believe us.
All right, so thanks to BuzzFeed on that. About that personal experience, about what the stories are. I know some of you had some trouble due to buffering and a couple of other areas, and I'll send that link out after so that you can get that. But what I want to do is ask you a question, and this is if you do not identify as transgender or as gender fluid. And the question is, we've talked a little bit about there is a process that you can go through from the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, which is the clinical steps that you take to change your body to the other gender so that if I'm a woman and I want to change my body to look like a man, then I can do that process. So that's a medical process that includes therapy, electrolysis, surgeries, a whole lot of things that whole process goes through. So I want to ask you, if you don't identify as transgender, would you go through that process if I gave you $1 million? Out and Equal has this slush fund that I get to take with me. So the next quiz is, if you do not identify as transgender, would you take $1 million to change your physical body to the opposite gender? So if you select your answer, yes, no, I don't know, prefer not to answer, not applicable. Oh, I've got a couple folks that said yes, they would take that. Have to divide that up. And it's interesting, the majority of individuals, about 75% said no, they would not do that. Again, and that's the first time you may have thought about your own gender identity, because as we walk around the world, we assume that everybody feels like we do, and that's part of that dimensions of diversity that we've been talking about, that you feel good in yourself, you identify who you are in yourself, and that's the way everybody else seems to be. So we've got a total of about 74% who said no, 14% that said I don't know, and about 6.5 that said yes, had about 5.2 not applicable. I'll have to write that to you in small bills from Out and Equal, but it's an interesting process. Somebody made a comment that, could I have another $1 million to change back? Those kind of areas, how we do that. But it's an opportunity for us to think and begin to identify with someone who is transgender. If you are LGBT, we my sense for myself was that I know that you can't, you identify fairly early that you have a different attraction. You know, just somehow, I probably knew at 8 or 9 that I was probably more attracted to women. I didn't call it a sexual orientation at that point because I didn't have those words, but I just knew I was different in my attractions. And then by the time I got to be a teenager living in Catholic school, I knew that wasn't something I could talk about. So we have a sense of ourselves as LGB. For gender identity, if you do not feel the same as what you were assigned at birth, it's that same kind of sense. So it's a great way to be an ally and to say, I understand. I don't understand your experience, but I do understand that sense of not feeling like the majority feels. And so it's a great way to start the discussion and build the allies with that. And it's important as we talk about pronouns and transitions and individuals, we find many individuals in the workplace who once they go through that process, if they're going to change their bodies, to match their gender identity, then they are not going to identify any longer as transgender. They're going to identify as a woman or as a man. So again, be careful with the terms, but the opportunity of cultural competency, if someone says I'm transgender, don't be the first thing that you ask about is their surgeries or something like that. Is interesting, tell me about that. When did you first discover that? Or, what does that mean in your life? Those are the kind of questions we can ask and let people talk to us more about their experience. Because it may be as simple as, the reason I'm telling you this is because even though I look female, I prefer male pronouns. I would like you to call me he instead of she. And that might be where they are on that spectrum of being transgender. And it's not a hierarchy, it's a spectrum, and there's diversity in that. So let's talk then about, because what we see in people is where we get in trouble with a lot of this, in gender expression. And we think about some of the terms, if you're feminine or masculine, cross-dressing, bigender, dual gender, genderqueer, drag performer, we've seen king or queen kind of terminologies. And if we think about what we expect in our society, and again, this is how we think in our brain, we're taught to think one way, is that a man is going to look masculine, whatever that stereotype comes up for us. A woman is going to look feminine. But what if somebody comes up and looks nonconforming? We see, especially around Pride, we see, a man with a beard in a dress, and that kind of causes that little place in the back of our head to cause a little amygdala attack, and it doesn't fit. We're trying to make that person fit into one box or the other, and that makes us uncomfortable, and we're aware of it, and we continue to look at folks and try to understand that. It catches our attention. But also another common experience we get is androgynous. You're walking down the street, you see somebody coming at you, and again, our sense as human beings is to look around and be aware of the world, fight or flight, what should I do, how do I react, and I can't tell if it's a man or a woman. I look at their clothes, I look at their body type, and that makes us uncomfortable. We watch them walk by. We may be thinking about it for another 5 minutes trying to figure it out, but that androgyny makes us uncomfortable because society says you have to be in one box or the other. But again, this is a lot of times how we make our first impression. I know when I travel and I don't have a dress in my closet anywhere, and so I'm going to be going to a job and I'm going to have a suit, maybe a tie on, and I'm going to walk into the women's restroom. And I frequently get told I don't belong in that women's restroom, although I identify, as a cisgender woman. And you have to kind of go, no, it's okay. And they go, no, really, you don't belong in here. And again, imagine you had to do that every single day of your life as someone who is transgender. So I can take that experience that I have about, my gender kind of stretching what people expect and imagine what that might be like for someone who is transgender and had to live that way and be afraid of walking in the restrooms for what they might experience or what other people might respond to them. So some of the images we have for gender expression is here, and we see different looks, and again, it changes by society. If you go to Europe or if you go to Asia, you're going to see a different set of standards and expectations. A lot of times the way people act and behave and how they look will vary. I know when I was younger, I went to France, and I thought, wow, all the guys here are gay because they're like kissing on each other and this kind of thing. But I didn't realize that was a cultural greeting, that was the way you said hello. So as we learn to work in a more global environment, we begin to learn that understanding of what either or is gets wider and broader with that. So I've got another question for you at this point. What's the sexual orientation of someone who's transgender? So it could be heterosexual or straight, homosexual, gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, any of the above, or none of the above. And Dana brought a couple of comments back about the $1 million question. It says, don't pay unless they do it. You can't change back. And then also about, she was once asked about her surgery as the first question in a public environment, and her answer was, no, I kept my appendix. So again, very invasive kind of HIPAA questions that we don't want to ask with that. So it looks like we've got, let's see, we're still up in the 90s in terms of how many folks. We've got a few more folks to come in and answer on this, on the sexual orientation of someone who's transgender. But it looks like the overall majority, 96% at this point, say any of the above, which is right. If you think about the 4 different concepts we talked about, assigned and birth sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, each one of those is an independent concept. We all have that part of that, and we all identify in different places in terms of being on the dimensions of diversity, but we all have all of those qualities. And it helps then in thinking about cultural competency that we're not thinking about an us and a them kind of situation as much. So this is kind of where the information and the definitions and terminology and concepts come to an end. But what we deal with day to day when we're talking with people, and even in our own minds sometimes, is about myths and stereotypes. We think about that there's some story that we've maybe been told through our upbringing, our family, our religious communities, those areas that become a truth about this particular group. All lesbians hate men, as an example. Or we have a stereotype that says if you're part of this group, then you must have these characteristics in a common meeting. All lesbians ride motorcycles, those kind of things. So what we find is that, in fact, I don't hate men as a lesbian. And yes, I do ride a motorcycle, but I'd rather have the conversation about having a motorcycle rather than it's because you found out that I was a lesbian. So we don't correlate those two. So let's do some of this myth and stereotype work. And these are not necessarily what you think, but what you may have heard or what you've had other people say to you. And we'll kind of break down each category. So just chat in the chat box. What are some of the myths and stereotypes about being gay? What do gay people look like? What kind of jobs do they have? Just go ahead and chat in the chat box, and I'll read those out as they come through. Hate sports, promiscuous. Gay men want to be women. Creative, the arts, it's a choice. Effeminate. Overly feminine, lipstick. Fashionable, great interior director, and interior decorators, good dressers, throw the best cocktail parties, unethical, stylish, artsy, fashionable, hate women, lots of good work. So, and those are the things that are said about somebody before you even get to know them. Aren't masculine, hairdressers. Those are the kind of things that are said about the community without any knowledge of the individual. And when you hear that and you talk about that, you think about, again, somebody hearing these kind of comments, that this is what we think about gay men. And then I'm not going to tell you that I'm gay because you're going to think all these things. So a lot of the rhetoric we hear in our community has an impact, especially on our youth and then our new employees coming in the workplace, where they don't want to identify as gay. All right, so let's jump over now to lesbians. What are some of the myths and stereotypes about lesbians? I gave you a couple already about hating men and riding motorcycles, but what do lesbians look like? What kind of jobs do they have? Butch, wear Birkenstocks. They know all the other lesbians. Mullets, wear flannel. Blue collar, unfashionable, plaid shirts. Yay, Dana, you got a 1965 Honda Dream. Good with tools, good plumbers, good with machines, tougher than guys, no makeup, abrupt, manly, can fix anything. Camping, drive Subarus. Again, Martina Navratilova, when she advertised that, you couldn't go to a bar on Saturday night and not find a Subaru. Masculine presenting, love softball. Lesbian women want to sleep with all women, do volunteer jobs. Let's see. Get into relationships quickly, the U-Haul concept, move in together after the first date. Yeah, exactly. So again, this is a lot of sense of who lesbians are when you say that word. A lot of these words come up not as myths and stereotypes that we might be able to laugh at or say, yes, that's not true or it is true, but it becomes fact, and that's how I make my judgments about what your capabilities are in the workplace, who you are as a person, what you value before we've even said hello. Live life like in the L word. Excellent. All right, let's add bisexual in here now. What are the myths and stereotypes? We talked about this a little bit earlier about some of the myths and stereotypes that we have. But what else about bisexuals? Again, how they look, what they do. They're confused. They can't decide where they are. They don't exist. Promiscuous. Sleep around. Go after anything with a pulse. Greedy. And think about jobs. I always have a fun, we talk about, blue-collar jobs and executive jobs. What jobs do bisexuals do, if you think about that? They're young. They don't want to be in committed relationships. Okay for women to be, but not for men. Only care about sex. Have the luxury of passing. Don't have to come out dishonest about who they are. And again, as a bisexual, whether you're in an LGBT group or if you're in a straight group or in the workplace, these kind of thoughts about you can really put an impact on how you perform and how you act. Because if people are thinking this about you, this is their first thought, and that's what we want to try to avoid and break. Now, again, we've been taught and told all these myths and stereotypes, or we hear the community talking about it, but it doesn't mean that we have to act on it or believe it. It kind of is a passing thought. Anybody who's tried to do any meditation, those thoughts come in your brain, and then you just let them go. And that's a lot of what this is about. You can't change what you've been taught and what you know, but you can change what you do and what you talk about and that awareness. And you can share it with others because it's a great teachable moment to say, I used to think bisexuals were X, Y, and Z, and I found out, I've got some really good friends now, and in fact that was all just a myth, and none of that is true. So how about transgender? Let's talk about what are some of those myths and stereotypes about someone who's transgender. And again, what they look like, what kind of jobs they might have, mentally ill, that they've had a sex-changing surgery. It's just a phase. If they're children, they're just going through that phase. Scary, unstable, denial, sad, flaky, hate themselves. Bad wardrobe choices, risk of losing their jobs. Again, for transgender employees, many times they do lose their job because of their presentation and how they look in the workplace or the discomfort of their coworkers. They're lost. Transgender men cannot be man of the house. Depressed, looking for attention, prostitutes, nightclub performers. Hyper-targeted by hate crimes. Yes, that's very much, especially transgender women of color at this point, are definitely being targeted by hate crimes and being killed. Looking at stereotypes is painful enough, and then you realize it's a learning experience. Yes, as these words go through, Steve, I agree with you. It's hard to hear some of these and to say this is what people are thinking. But when we name them, it is a power we can put to it to say this is what we have to change in people's thinking. This is how we become allies. These are the areas we need to discuss to let people know it's not a mental illness, that these are individuals who have a life-changing situation, and how they decide to go with that life-changing situation may be as simple as changing pronouns to a full transition, but those are all valid changes in their life, just as many of us go through changes based on our life experience. Finally, let's do one more, and this one's always kind of fun since we had so many corporate employees. What's the stereotype about corporate employees? A little more about transgender. I wonder how G or L would feel if they walked around with a sign around their neck saying gay. Trans people feel like this most of the time. When they come out, they're ostracized. So back to corporate people now. Follow the rules. They will never leave their job. Suit and tie, selling out, all the same, boring, yuppie, wealthy, loyal brats, well-paid with great benefits, only care about money, non-inclusive, stiff, well-dressed and overworked, conservative, older white men, drones, whitewashed, structured, conservative, earn my spot as a corporate employee, careful about expressing personal opinions. So again, we see someone, we see how they're dressed, we look at their gender expression, we make some assumptions about who they are, and that's what the list of stereotypes come up for individuals as we think about this. Now, when I start to talk to somebody in any of these groups, I find out it's different. As I said, I ride a motorcycle, but I'd rather learn that about somebody else because we're talking about motorcycles, not because I'm a lesbian. And the same thing with corporate employees. We know for ourselves, if we look at ourselves, we don't fit all those stereotypes in who we are. So this really gets in the way of communication, and if we can break this down, that's how those dimensions of diversity get learned. Today, if you look at your workplace, very different from 75 years ago, where we looked at everyone did look like white, from the same background, from the same educational level. You see much more diversity now, and we've figured out over the years how to do that. It's not perfect. There's still areas in parts of the country, in certain sectors, in certain locations, in certain jobs where people still have issues because of their diversity. But at least there's a structure in place now that says, we can address this and that's not acceptable. And the companies that are doing great work as diversity inclusion are doing that kind of work to say that's not acceptable. And Esther, way to represent heterosexual female, and you also ride a motorcycle. So way to break those myths and stereotypes. So those are thinking about that as these thoughts come up, if you feel uncomfortable, if you meet someone and you're not sure why they make you feel uncomfortable, again, it's your response. It's not them. They're just being themselves walking around in life. Where does it come from? Is it a myth? Is it a stereotype? Is it you don't know enough about that particular part of the community? Those are the awarenesses that can help you move forward from thinking about I'm walking around, everybody's just like me, to be able to embrace that diversity and the dimensions that we all bring. One thing we didn't talk about in all this was a term called heterosexism. And that's the assumption that whenever you're in the dominant group, everybody is just like you, has the same values, has the same experience. So it's kind of the overall arching discussion we've been having about diversity. And it just means that when you meet someone and you meet me as a woman, you say, do you have a husband? And at that moment in the workplace, I have to make a decision, especially if I'm a new employee, is do I correct you at that moment and come out? Or do I just say no and kind of avoid the question? Or do I say, oh, yes, and we've been together for 10 years. And tell my story with kind of a covering approach that says, you want to know I'm in a relationship. And so there's much better ways that we'll talk about some of the best practices of how to have these discussions that open it up. Because it's a very awkward moment for everyone. And for an LGBT employee to have to reveal who they are, or as an ally coming out in those discussions, you end up not being sure what the other person, how they're going to react. Are they going to be hostile, supportive, neutral? How do I do this? Could this impact my job? And all those things go through your mind. Now, if you're walking around and you're not used to thinking about that, you never realize how hard that is. And there's an exercise that we do in the live classes called kind of what you do this weekend, and talks about that. And it says, what if you couldn't tell your story about who you are and be comfortable with that, and how difficult that might be if you had to tell a lie in the workplace. And if we can remember that, it can shape the way we ask our questions and the way we have the conversations. But we also have those assumptions when we meet someone that excludes if you're a bi or you're a trans. If you see me at a party one time with a woman and you go, okay, I got it, that's a lesbian, I understand this now. And then I come to the next party and I'm with a guy, you just go, oh, I'm confused and I don't understand. Okay, I'm not even going to discuss this or figure it out. Again, expand your cultural competency. There might be ways to ask that, again, that's somebody important in your life. And the same thing with people who are trans. What are you thinking about that expectation of how people look, and what assumptions do you make? And heterosexism and bisexism and transisms are just unconscious thinking. It's the way our brain just works. Again, that category, wanting to put things in boxes. But we also have another level of that. It's the phobias. And that's a very active, I don't like you, I don't want any part of you, I can't work with you, from homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. And these are some of the areas that we move out. Someone mentioned the violence against trans women. Very definitely this is where that reflects. So it's not just, I don't understand and I'm willing to learn. It's I don't understand, I don't like it, and I may on some spectrum actively prevent you from living out your life. Kimberly had a question. If someone asks an assuming question about someone else, another colleague, what's the best way to address? Do you prefer to let X comment or want to be respectful but minimize the situation? We'll talk about that in our best practices in a couple minutes about how to handle that. And Julie asked about for a transgender person when talking with them, what do you prefer? What do they prefer you ask? Do you have a spouse or a partner? It's interesting because within the LGBT community right now, there is, because of the marriage issue, I prefer to call my wife my partner because I don't like the wife term. And somebody got at me the other day because I wasn't embracing the term wife and marriage. And so it's still a personal preference, but it's always good to ask. For someone who's transgender, again, do you have somebody significant in your life who's your partner? And what's your, if you're not sure and you look at someone, it's very common today with Gen Y organizations and colleges to start a conversation with what's your preferred pronouns. And then you get more expanded. Jean just made a comment about being bi and polyamorous. So you call your partners friends. So as we talk to each other, just think about how you can open up. And if somebody says a correction and says, I'd prefer you to use male pronouns with me, or I have a partner instead of a wife, those are all things that you remember. That's the biggest thing. It's a learning experience with that. So let me ask another question of everybody here. When you first meet someone and expect them to have an opposite sex partner, you are being what? Is it homophobic, heterophobic, heterosexist, or homosexist? Go ahead and pick your answer on that. We're doing good. Do keep the questions going. We've got about 15 more minutes, and I'm going to start into best practices next. But I just want to do a time check. I know for some folks, they forget it's a 75-minute session, so we'll go to 11:15. So answers are coming in, and it looks like we've got almost 2/3 have voted on that. So again, when you first meet someone, expect them to have an opposite sex partner. The correct answer is heterosexist, that you're putting a heterosexual model on the world and seeing it that way. If you happen to live in San Francisco and you go down to Castro, homosexuals can exist. You make the assumption that everybody's walking down the street is probably homosexual. The other two, the homophobic and heterophobic, are again not about assumptions. They're usually about a much more responsive. I'm either going to say something or I'm going to do something, and I really don't like you. So there's a basic premise that I start with, that before I've even met you, if I find out that you have an opposite sex partner, or if I'm making an assumption about you, is that I don't like that, and I'm going to attack that, rather than I just don't make the awareness. So that's the difference between the heterosexist and the homophobic difference. Don't like someone because they're LGBT or biphobic or transphobic. So the right answer on that, again, was heterosexist. So let's talk a little bit about some inclusive practices, how you do this. This is the part of cultural competency where a little background, concept, terminology, but now let's talk about, how you apply this in a workplace or in your community. Do you have someone important to your life? Do you have a partner? It's a great way to start. Would you like to bring someone to the event? I mean, many times we put out invites, we're going to have a barbecue, bring your husband or wife and family. Question many times will come back, especially if you're in a state where there's no marriage, does that mean I can bring my domestic partner, or can I bring my family with me if I'm LGBT? So thinking about the terminology that you put out in terms of invitations to people, or finding out about them, just how their questions are. I've had several allies who have said, I've gone to calling my wife my partner until we get marriage equality around the whole country because I want to stand in solidarity. And that's great. I mean, there's not the only way to do that, but speaking up and talking about the issues and sharing your experience, even if you didn't change that, because you might check with your wife and make sure that that's okay to do that. But making sure that you're discussing the issues is the more important part of an ally. How you say it, we're going to stumble, we're going to make mistakes, somebody's going to say, no, that's not a term that we use. You go, great, thank you. Or that's not a term I identify with. But to give each other space to be able to learn from each other and get to know people. Check out pronouns. It's perfectly appropriate. Say, what are your preferred pronouns? we had an employee here at Out and Equal who that was their gender fluidity and bigender sense of themselves, where they were more male identified and wanted to use, again, identified as female, but wanted male pronouns. And we talked to our bosses about that. The boss called the employee in and said, so tell us, well, which do you like? And we actually put it out for everybody to know. And just that simple little change of being identified by the right pronouns made such a difference that this employee had never been asked that before in a workplace and just was comfortable. And yes, people stumbled, forgot, made mistakes. We would say if a customer called and said, can I talk to her? And I said, actually, he prefers male pronouns, so I'll get you him on the phone. So you don't have to yell and make a big issue over it, but do correct it and be consistent. That's part of being an ally and understanding that. And that opened up some great discussions with individuals about, well, what does that mean? Are they transgender? And I said, in the big umbrella, yes, they are, but they basically are not doing anything to change their body to match their gender identity. They just prefer different pronouns. And then also, use LGBT. We talked about that a little bit already about when talking about employees in the workplace. I might identify as queer or gender fluid or a lot of these other terms, but when we talk about the kind of corporate world, we probably want to use LGBT, because I don't want to meet somebody and you run down the hallway and say, hey, did you know that Pat's queer? That might not be heard well by other people. It's a generational. A lot of boomers have problems with the word queer. So as we see the changes demographically by generations in the workplace, we'll probably see that change. But right now, the recommended best practice is to use LGBT when talking about your employees in the workplace. See each person and each employee as a person. Find out about them. Even if you go to an LGBT event, don't look at it through the lens of this is an LGBT person and what are my myths and stereotypes that come up. To have a conversation with them. If they haven't come out to you and they're telling you about the weekend and they say something about, yeah, we went to the beach and she really liked it. I didn't know you had a partner. How long have you been together? And open up those discussions. Ask them to speak about other topics. A lot of times we'll bring the LGBT employee in, and that's all they talk about. But they might be an amazing programmer, or they might be great in marketing. Use them for their expertise, not just their LGBT. So again, that whole person concept. Never inquire about any medical or personal issues on the job. Someone may share with you, I'm going to be out for a couple weeks because I'm going to have a surgery. The response would be, well, is there anything I can do to help? Can I cover it with work? You can definitely look at that as a possibility to do that. And again, support. If somebody has a breakup in the workplace, think about how you would react if somebody got divorced. You'd be supportive. You'd say, can I help? I can cover for you. Again, supporting the individuals where they are without necessarily prying and needing to know all the details about their life. Let each employee tell their own story. Don't out them. If you find out that a new employee identifies as LGBT, let that person tell the other people. Don't make it the water cooler gossip or conversation about did you know, or don't start the conversation of somebody who comes in who may be in the process of transition and says, do you think that's a man or a woman? Those are the kind of questions that that aren't helpful in the workplace and don't get the job done, because people will hear that conversation and it creates a more hostile environment for them to work in. When you're feeling uncomfortable, ask yourself why. What's come up when I talk to somebody or I meet with someone, or maybe something you've heard today on that that makes you feel more uncomfortable with that? And how can you deal with that? What do you need to learn more about? What's that? And look at how it comes in. So we've talked about today about everyone has an assigned birth sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or gender expression. Use LGBT. It's okay to ask pronouns. And it's not even prefer. I actually heard a discussion the other day. It's about these are their pronouns. But just be aware you can ask those questions. And how you can be more inclusive and get to know your employees. And talking about and learning more, if you meet someone, find other allies to talk to. Take classes like Building Bridges. Talk to your ERG. Look around at your ERG and say, where are our bi and trans employees? Where are people of color? Who are we missing? Who's not here? And that's a great way to lead to talk about what are we doing that doesn't make this space as welcoming for someone who doesn't look like me. So those isms are in there. So I'd like to do a quick question before we get into questions here. Type in something real short that you want to learn more about or that you learned today. Just kind of, this is a check-in at the end of the course to see, what you thought or what you're going to take away. We'll do some action planning in Part 3 if you join us in those areas. And again, remember that Part 2 and Part 3 look at business case and allies and action planning. So you get a chance to have those conversations. Just go ahead and type in the box and hit submit. Those answers will come up. Talking about considering gender-specific pronouns, implicit bias. We're actually going to do a lot of that, talking about that at the summit this year, about both unconscious and implicit bias, as well as covering. Thinking about trans-ally etiquette and protocol, looking forward to ally development, transgender workplace issues, action planning, like the stats from Catalyst Knowledge Center. We'll get a lot more stats in Part 2 when we talk about the business case. Transgender issues, definition of heterosexism, expanding bi awareness, learning more about transgender. Again, that a lot of areas that's discussion happen now. Unconscious bias, global mobility, ways for allies to apologize when they mess up. Good discussion in Allies Part 3 that we'll talk about. Respectful, inclusive professional behavior for all in the workplace. So great areas to talk about. These are good. Also now, there's a few minutes left. If we've got any questions, I'll go ahead and take this off here. Any questions, again, chat your questions in. We've had some good discussion all the way through. We'll also get a chance next week. We'll have a more in-depth. So if you're registered for the class, we'll review this next week as we go into the business case, and I'll get a little more feedback from you one-on-one in the class. If you're interested in registering, just go up on the website to outandequal.org, click on Out and Equal University, and be able to register for that course. It's $69.95 for the series. If you're government or nonprofit or academic, it's $59.95. And if you've got a group of folks that want to, that you think this might be a good course for, we have a group discount for $49.95. That's kind of the commercial part. But also, they can listen to the recording. So we get a lot of folks who just like to listen to a podcast, but a lot of folks also like to do this more interactive. And Dana, the $49.95 would be if you registered 5 or more people. Individual for government or nonprofit would be $59.95, and corporate registration would be $69.95. So, but it would be $49.95 per person if you had a group of 5 or more. So, not seeing too many questions come in. We've got about 4 minutes left. And so I want to make sure that next week, not April 21st, wrong date, sorry, April 28th at 10 a.m. will be our second class, Building Bridges Part 2, that'll look at the business case. Here's the link to register, and again, you can find it on our website. It's also an opportunity, again, this course is a prerequisite for Train the Trainer, and taking this course, and that Train the Trainer webinar course series, again, a 3-part series, will start on, that's actually May 19th. So I've got to update my calendars here that course will start. And the trainer certification is good for 2 years, where you can use this Out and Equal material to be a peer educator in your workplace or in your community. So with that, we'll give you a few minutes back. I thank all of you for your participation and your inputs and your insights, and would love to talk with you more. Dana, we can talk offline if you want to drop me an email looking at some of the ways of using this. That's probably a longer discussion. But think about that's where we're going in the next couple of classes, is how you use this and how you can apply it, and appreciate all the work that you're doing already and taking your time out of your day to take this course. So with that, we will see you next week, and thanks so much. There'll be a survey at the end, so please go ahead and fill that in as well, and we'll talk to you next week.